Bristol Myers Squibb, Takeda Oncology, Karyopharm Therapeutics, Adaptive Biotechnologies, Oncopeptides, Janssen Oncology, AbbVie, Sanofi, Amgen Oncology, and Genentech. The agenda for today is as follows. I am not sure why it says 3 p.m. That is totally my bad. It's not 3 p.m. 3 p.m. somewhere. My introductions will last just a couple more minutes. And then after that, we will turn the time over to Michael Riotto for his presentation around 1:40 p.m. That is correct, 1:40 p.m. We will open it up for questions and answers for Michael. So today's topic is when stem cell transplants don't go as expected. Throughout the year, we've been talking about different things regarding stem cell transplants, and something that my team of coaches who have helped me come up with curriculum for this chapter, one thing that they wanted to explore and make sure of is that we're real about the experience. And though it's rare, sometimes stem cell transplants don't go as expected. And that can happen in one of two ways. One, there are side effects or difficulties during the procedure, which was Michael's case. And another case, which we will talk about later on, is what happens when you go through a stem cell transplant and it doesn't get you into remission or it doesn't get you where you want to be. Today, we're specifically talking about what happens when there's an infection or when there's other complications during the stem cell transplant procedure or shortly after. So Michael's going to be sharing with us his real experience today of the stem cell transplant. We didn't want this to scare you, but we did want to talk about this so that you feel comfortable, even if something happens, what it's going to look like. So I won't give you the presentation. That's Michael's job, but I would like to present Michael to you. Michael Riotto was 51 years old when he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma in 2011. He had his autologous stem cell transplant later that year. Post-transplant, he said it took him about 3 months before he felt he was well enough to return to work full-time as a department store manager. Today, Michael is retired and says life is great. There's always a silver lining, he says, you just have to find it. Michael finds his joy in walking, a favorite form of exercise that he says clears his mind. He enjoys time with his wife and children and looks forward to spring each year when he can grow his hybrid peonies. That is such fun information. I love when bios are a little bit different than usual. So thank you, Michael, for making that fun for us. I'll also add that Michael just dropped his son off at grad school, I believe at MIT. So we're excited for you, Michael, and the time is now yours to present to us.
All right, Audrey, am I back off mute now? All right, good. So good afternoon, everybody. And if it was 3 o'clock, I think I'd still be taking a nap, but not do that. And just a short note about the walking, talk about clearing your mind and getting ready for today's presentation. I took an hour and 5-minute walk right before the presentation. So I just made it home just in time to shower and get on screen. So we're all good today. So anyhow, folks, my name is Michael Riotto, as you already know, and I'm pleased to be with you this afternoon. I'd like to thank Myeloma Crowd by HealthTree for hosting this session today. I'm here as a member of the Multiple Myeloma Journey Partners group, and I joined the program about, I guess it's 8 years ago now. Maybe Tracy can, my cohort here, can refresh that, but it's about 8 years now, to talk to people about multiple myeloma and stem cell transplant. And speaking of multiple myeloma, we say it in this presentation about 300 times, so I shorten it all up to MM. So when I say MM, I'm referring to multiple myeloma. I also talk about stem cell transplant a tremendous amount, and I'm going to shorten that up to ASCT also, just to keep it just a little bit easier. A friendly reminder that this is my journey. As you well know, that everybody with myeloma is different. Everybody's treatment is different. Everybody's reaction is different. So this is truly just about me. I hope that I can impart some of my information to help you along with your journey. So, well, we're going to start this out a little bit, and I'm a fairly easygoing presentation guy. So the presentation talks about Myeloma 101, which at this point, most of you are probably fairly familiar with. Talks about myeloma diagnosis, and then we're going to go into stem cell transplant and how I went through all that. So just to be sure, if you have some questions about myeloma 101 that I'm going to skip through pretty fast in my presentation. Normally I take longer because I'm talking to some newly diagnosed patients. But if you have something, just raise your hand and Audrey can stop me and we'll go from there. Or we can wait to the end and do it at that point. So let's talk a little bit about my story. And as Audrey just said, my son, and that's his picture on the left there, or you're right, I can never get those right. That's his picture from graduation from high school. He just graduated from Lehigh University this May, and we just dropped him off at MIT last weekend. He is a chemical engineering major, and my wife and I are extremely, extremely proud of him. He's a really bright kid. He certainly didn't get any of his brains from me. They all come from my wife. I'll be the first one to admit it. So 100%. Picture on the right there, you can see we had a little fun at Lehigh when we were there. My wife is on the far right, my son in the brown coat, my daughter who just turned 30. It's a good thing to get old. I feel great that she turned 30 and I'm here to see that. And then of course me. So I live right outside of Philadelphia, in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, if any of you are familiar with it, about an hour outside of the city limits. And we've been here about 24 or 5 years now, and we love living here. So I definitely can say that. So a little bit more about me. As my bio mentions, I was diagnosed in July of 2011, quite by accident, everybody. It literally, my son was 13 at the time. And you know how your kids badge you to do things? It was my first day off in several days. As my bio mentioned, I was a department store manager for, Boscov's department stores. And it's similar to Dillard's or Macy's if you want to talk about comparisons. And grueling job, love my job. And it was my first day off in like 10 days. And my son's like, come on, Dad, I want to go to the beach for the day. And the beach from my house is about an hour and a half away. It's no big deal. So, of course, being a great dad, I relented and drove my son to the beach that day with his friends. And if any of you have been out there and you're familiar with body surfing, okay? Anybody out there? Anybody shake their head body surfing? A few of you. So, of course, me being the great dad, I wanted to keep up with the youngsters. So I went body surfing with them. Well, that was not a smart thing to do. I actually got tumbled in a wave and I hit my head and my neck on the beach really, really hard. And it hurt, but it didn't feel like it was broken, but it hurt really bad. And when you wake up in the morning from sleeping on it the wrong way, well, take that and magnify it a few times. So we stayed for a little while longer. Then I said to the boys, I think maybe we should time to go home. So we drove home. And we get home and I talked to my wife and I said to her, I said, this just hurts really bad. And I said, you know what? And she says, why don't you call the doctor? Why don't you go to the ER? I'm like, no. Being a typical man, I said, it'll go away in the morning. Well, guess what? Slept on it. Didn't go away in the morning. Called my doctor. He says, I'll send you for an x-ray. So he sends me for an x-ray. I get home and a few hours later, he says to me, he says, well, you really did fracture your neck. I broke my C4 and my C5. And he says, I want you to go to the local emergency room. I've already contacted them. And they're already ready to go. They're going to fit you with a collar and you'll be good to go. So I drive myself, thinking I'm perfectly fine, drove myself to the local emergency room where they did a CT scan. They did blood work. They fitted with me my collar. And then I'm just sitting there. And you know how you get that uneasy feeling that something's not quite right? Well, it wasn't quite right. And they basically said that whatever you've got, we can't handle it here. We need to ship you off to a major medical center. So off I went by ambulance to a major medical center in downtown Philadelphia. Again, more tests, more blood tests. About 1:30 in the morning the next day, one of the fellows comes in and says, your bones are moth-eaten. And of course, I look at him and say, what are you talking about? And he says, your bones are moth-eaten and we have to do some more blood tests tomorrow and some more other tests and we'll let you know. Well, of course, everyone's favorite test, a bone marrow biopsy the next morning, confirmed that I had multiple myeloma. So at that point, my wife and I are looking at each other and we're saying, what is multiple myeloma? We didn't have a single clue what it was. A kind nurse brought us some pamphlets, and that's how we started. So what is multiple myeloma? Well, it's a cancer of the blood that develops in the bone marrow. There's about 30 or some odd thousand new cases every year in the US. It affects the plasma cells, the type of white blood cell that fights infection and produces antibodies. It can affect your bones, or in my case, from my head all the way to my knees, or it can infect your kidneys too. So how do you diagnose and how do you treat multiple myeloma? Well, diagnosing is relatively simple. Basically, can do a bone marrow biopsy, and you can have over 60% plasmas in your bone marrow. You can have renal failure. You can have bone lesions like I did. You can have anemia. You can have an elevated calcium. You can have multiple lesions on an MRI. There are multiple different ways that you can diagnose multiple myeloma. So after you're diagnosed, how do you treat it? Well, that was my biggest question. So what the doctor looks at, and again, most of you know this, and if you want some more further clarification, just raise your hand and we'll go through it. But treatments are talked about your aggressiveness. Do you have standard risk? Do you have high risk? Do you have a chromosome deletion? Your overall health. Do you have any comorbidities? Do you have diabetes? Do you have a heart issue? Current symptoms and complications. In my case, I had a fractured neck, which made treatment a little bit more difficult. And did I have any previous treatment? So after we got through the treatment phase, the goal of treatment is really, really simple. The goal of treatment is to get you in remission. That is the 100% goal. If you can get yourself in remission, the goal is to keep you there as long as possible. So as we go through and my doctor did my induction therapy and we did my chemotherapy and we did radiation, we talked all about a stem cell transplant through this whole process. Every time we met every 3 to 4 weeks. We went through all the processes. And when I first heard that word transplant, it got me scared. I mean, there's so much misinformation out there about transplant. And I have to say, folks, whatever you do, don't just Google myeloma and stem cell transplant. Dr. Google is not your friend. You definitely want to stay to Myeloma Crowd and HealthTree or the MMRF or the IMF or the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. And we'll talk more about that at the end of the presentation. But Dr. Google is not your friend. There's so much misinformation out there. So let's go back to the stem cell transplant process. And this is what you guys want to learn today. And this is what we're going to talk about. So the process is it's about using a high dose of chemotherapy. And the high dose of chemotherapy is what actually works to kill the myeloma. But when you use that high dose of chemotherapy, it also kills all the other good blood cells. So what happens is you need the transplant or rescue, so to speak, to restore your blood and your blood making ability back to normal. So sometimes it's referred to as a rescue or support. You use your own cells. That's the key thing about this. Many folks think of an allogenic transplant, which is when you use somebody else's cells. But for myeloma, 98% of the time, you use your own cells, which is called an autologous stem cell transplant, which comes from the word auto, which was Greek, which means self. So you use your own cells. So the risk then of infection and all those other wonderful things is very little when you use your own cells. So what is a stem cell and how does it work? Well, let's talk about it. All stem cells start out as bone marrow. They come out of your bone marrow. They come out of your blood. And there are 3 types. There's your red, your white, and your platelets, okay? So the doctor is going to recommend that super high dose of chemotherapy, okay, to treat you. And mostly because so far through all the clinical trials, through all the evidence that it goes back to, that it's going to show that a stem cell transplant has the best chance of a long-term remission and basically I have to put this the correct way here. We'll skip that for the moment. We'll come back to it. So there are several steps that you lead to. Audrey, I see you laughing, but anyhow, so it's okay. So let's talk about the steps to get ready for a transplant. So the very first step in the transplant process is mobilization. It's a process called apheresis. And apheresis is basically they insert a catheter in your neck most of the time. And it's got these dangly things that go right into your arteries and veins. And they take your blood out and then they put your blood back in. And they process it through the machine. It's called an apheresis machine. And what they do is they take out your stem cells. And what happens right before that is they actually, you're going to have multiple injections of medicine days before and days during the apheresis process to quote unquote mobilize those stem cells out of your bone marrow into your blood so they make it easy for collection. The collection be 3 to 5 hours each day. And they can be 1 to 5 days. They're typically consecutive. Most people collect enough stem cells for 2 to 3 transplants. I was one of those slow uptakers. It took me 4 days to collect my stem cells. I have enough banked for another transplant. I already used 1 set, and I have enough banked for another transplant that are frozen somewhere. So I can't tell you much about the apheresis process other than the fact that you really need a good book, and you need to keep yourself occupied because you're sitting in the chair and this great machine is taking your blood out and putting it back in while it's harvesting your stem cells. But the biggest thing about it is boredom, to be honest with you. There's nothing painful about it whatsoever. It's very easy. So one of the things that if you're thinking about getting ready for a transplant, but you might want to put it off for a little while, one of the things that they recommend is that you collect and you store your stem cells now, because as you go through more and more treatment, your stem cells get degraded. So it's better to harvest them now and use them later than it would be to put it off for a later time. So again, as I mentioned, in my case, it took me 4 days to do that and collect enough cells for 2 stem cell transplants. So after they've collected my cells, we go on to the next step, and that's the chemotherapy step. And what happens is it's a super high dose of chemotherapy, and it was given to me in, let's go back to December 27th, and 2 days before my transplant. And what it does is it's given to you by IV. There's lots of side effects, folks, and we'll talk about them in a minute. There's nausea, and there's a headache, and whatever it is. But the doctors and the nurses and your healthcare team are just awesome. I have to tell you that. They give you everything that they possibly can to go through it and make sure that you do okay. So after you've done the chemotherapy, okay, the next step is actually the transplant itself. You get your stem cells back. And to kind of talk about it, it's kind of anticlimactic. It's literally an IV bag that they hang up. My wife was by my side, and 2 hours later, they're all back in. It just absolutely amazes me that it's that simple and that easy, but that's what it is. So after transplant, you go through what they call a recovery part, and that would be the next step. And the infused stem cells, they travel back through your bloodstream and eventually go back to your bone marrow, where they start producing new blood cells. It's a process called engraftment. You're closely monitored during this whole process. It can be done either inpatient or outpatient, depending on your hospital and facility, okay? During the time when you're after transplant, it takes roughly about 2 weeks for your blood cells to return to a safe level. So during that period, you're often neutropenic, as they call it, where the only things that you can eat is literally food that's pulverized and cooked, beyond recognition. That's if you have an appetite at all. And it takes about 3 weeks or so before you finally start to feel a little bit better. Okay. Recovery can take several months afterwards at home. But again, it's okay. So the next step after recovery was talk about my story now. I do believe that's the next slide, Tracy. Yeah, now you get to hear all about me. So this is what you guys want to hear. So I have to say that my decision for a transplant wasn't an easy one. I have to say that. We weighed everything. As I mentioned back then, I was diagnosed in July. I went through 3 rounds of induction therapy, really heavy chemo all the way through, July, August, September, October, November, December. The first week of December, my apheresis happened, or my stem cells were collected. And as I mentioned, it took me 4 days. Was it painful? No, just boring, to be really honest with you. You're sitting there, we're just waiting for those stem cells to be collected. So right after my stem cells were collected, I saw my healthcare team, and they said, all right, we'd like to do the transplant right away. And of course, I'm looking at them along with my wife and saying, but that's right before Christmas. That means I'd be in the hospital for Christmas. And I'd really not. And back then, way back when I didn't know as much as I know today about myeloma and treatment and all those great things, I didn't know if I'd have another Christmas. I didn't have a clue. And we said, what, can we put it off till just after Christmas? And reluctantly, my doctor agreed, and he said, but you know what, you're going to be in the day after Christmas. And true to his word, December 26th, I was admitted to the hospital. December 27th of 11, I was given my high dose of chemo. And that was really rough. I have to say that. You want to talk about side effects? They give you all kinds of terrific medicine to hold on to your nausea and make sure you're okay. But, you know, did I sweat? Yes. Did I have bloodshot eyes? Yes. Did I vomit? Yes. Did I have diarrhea? Yes. You know, all those things would happen those couple of days after that high dose of chemo. But then, you know, 2 days later, on December 29th, which is my second birthday, as they so call it, I was given my stem cells back. And you know, it was a pretty miraculous day. I have to say that. And so on the 29th, I was fine. And you know, I'm in a regular room, and you know, you're having an IV, and you're feeling exhausted as you're going through this, and your appetite is pretty nil, to be honest with you. I spend a lot of time doing frozen ginger ale, which I found to be wonderful. Or also frozen water ice. Those were the only things that kind of satisfied my taste buds at the moment. So I'm going through in the first few days, and about 5 days in, I went into septic shock. And this is one of the things that you wanted to learn about. And my PICC line, you know, I had a PICC line, and that's the arm, the line, excuse me, that goes in your arm so that they can take care of your IVs and your blood and everything. My PICC line became infected. It's like a 1% chance, you know, and my doc often refers to me, if there's a 1 to 3% chance of something, I'm going to get it. So my PICC line became infected, and I went into septic shock. And so they rushed me over to the cardiac care unit because they couldn't get my heart rate down. And they were trying to put IVs in me everywhere. And I have to say that they tried everywhere. And if you've ever had an IV put in your foot, you never, ever want to have an IV put in your foot. But I had them in my arms, in my legs, in my feet, in my neck, everywhere, to try to flush my body with fluid to flush the infection out. So I was in CCU for 5 days. I was packed with ice from head to toe to keep my temperature down because I was running a constant fever. Somewhere in the middle of the night, and my wife recalls this, my wonderful wife, Monique, by the way, who was by my side for everything. She says that, I think it was the second or third night, that the doc called her out of the room and said, you know, you might want to call the family, and you might want to have them come and see him. And somewhere along the way, she said that I shouted out that I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. And I don't remember that, but to this day, she says I said that, and I didn't. So a couple days later, after I had been blowing up like a Pillsbury Doughboy, so to speak, I was puffy from head to toe. The septic shock finally recited a little bit, and I went back to a regular room. So back in a regular room after those 5 days, I started to eat a little bit more water ice. And one of the things that I have to say, and it's very wasteful, and I'm not a wasteful person at all, but I started to learn after a few days to literally order every single thing that was on the menu. I ordered everything that was on the menu. And because you never knew at what point or what item you were going to be hungry for. Was it going to be applesauce? Was it going to be a grilled cheese? Was it going to be a hamburger? You just never knew. And most of the time it was literally probably a bowl of cereal, but that's what it was. And so, because you need to eat, you need to be able to keep up your stamina just a little bit, along with just all those IVs that are given you. So I ended up being in the hospital for 24 days. So again, going back, when I got back in that regular room, I did lose all my hair, and I don't have much today to speak about, so I won't even talk about it, but I did lose all my hair. And you know, when we talk about my bio and the silver lining about chemo and a stem cell transplant is, for those of you out there, you notice I have a little scruff here. I hate shaving. Well, I didn't have to shave for like 4 months. So there's a little bit of a silver lining when you're talking about getting chemo, because I lost all my hair from my head to my toe. So, but not shaving for 4 months, beautiful thing, beautiful thing. So let's go back. So I'm in my room, and I'm doing relatively well. And you know, it's not like one day you wake up and you feel fantastic, but every day is a little bit better than the day before. And every day I would try to walk just a little bit more. So I'd get my little IV pole, and I'd walk around the floor. And, you know, I'd be really happy the first day if I got around 1 lap. And the next day, you know, let's get around 2 laps, and so forth and so on. And that's what it was. So one of the things that also gave me some trouble is every single night towards the end, I'm almost getting ready to be discharged. It's like day 18 or day 19. And every single night I would spike a fever, and they couldn't figure it out. It drove them crazy. The daytime I was fine, no fever, no nothing, but every single night I spiked a fever. Finally, they brought in an infectious doctor team, and they found out that I got fungal pneumonia in my lungs. And so what did they do? Lots of antibiotics. So I lots of intravenous antibiotics in the hospital. And then when I came home after those 24 days in the hospital, I had intravenous a pump that was hooked on my waist that automatically went in. And I had that for about 6 weeks. Was it inconvenient? Yeah, a little bit, but it didn't really matter. So I'm at home, and I'm recovering. And I have to say the first day, my family room to my bathroom was probably 10 yards. And those walking there, that first day, those 10 yards, I didn't think I was going to make it, but I did. And then the next day I challenged myself. I said, all right, I need to walk out and get the mail at the mailbox, and this was, back in January, February. And every day I tried to force myself to just walk a little bit more. And that's how I got to be my love for walking. So I'd walk the next day to the neighbor's house. Then I'd force myself the next day or two to walk to the next stop sign. And every single day I'd walk a little bit more to help my recovery. And by the time I was ready to go back to work, which was the beginning of April, I was walking just a slight bit over 2 miles a day. These days I try to walk between 3 and 4 miles every day. At least I try. It doesn't happen all the time, but I try. So going back at first when we got home too, it was still difficult to eat. I have to say that, simple things were the best. A simple sandwich or some soup made a difference. I didn't start eating full meals until probably almost, I would say March, April, May, until I started to eat full meals. And that was okay. I did learn to watch soap operas and a whole lot of cooking shows while I'm sitting at home learning to do all these great things. So I do most of the family cooking now. I actually have become a fairly decent cook. So again, going back, there are some silver linings to all this crazy stuff. So I think going back through the whole transplant process, I think one of the hardest things to do was to let someone help. My wife and I were so used to doing everything by ourselves. And we finally, somewhere through all of it, when someone said, does your son need a ride to football practice? Yes, that's a great thing. Take him to football practice. We learned then, my daughter needed an oil change in her car. It's like, yeah, you can take her and get the oil change. It was so difficult, I have to say that, to let someone else help you. But in the end, it was incredible because number one, it makes them feel better. And number two, it really takes a huge burden off of you. So through my journey with multiple myeloma, I learned a few things. It's really important, I think. Number one is to educate yourself. And I'm so glad you're all here today. To educate yourself, to find out as much about myeloma and stem cell transplant as you possibly can. The news changes out there almost every day. Almost every day there's a new clinical trial result or there's something new. So educating yourself is really, really important. Visiting a doctor who specializes in myeloma. I can't express how important that is to see a myeloma specialist. Why? Your local hematologist, oncologist, they're wonderful doctors, but they're not up on the latest treatment. They're not up on the latest therapies. They have so many other things that they're trying to take care of that they just can't do it all. So a lot of people said, well, I love my local doctor. Well, that's great. And that's wonderful because your myeloma specialist and your local doc will probably work together. So what happened in my case, just to talk about that, my main myeloma specialist was in downtown Philadelphia, hour and 20 minutes away. But I did all my chemotherapy and all my blood work and everything right here at my local oncologist, right where I live. So I didn't have to travel in all the time. I only had to travel in every 4 or 5 weeks, for a scan or for a treatment or something like that. But most of it was right here. And they'll work together. So that way you can do that. So the other thing is identify whether there's navigation services. Most major medical centers now have a nurse navigator, a transplant manager, somebody out there that can help you navigate, get all your appointments done and take care of that. So I can't stress enough to bring someone with you to your doctor's appointment. These days, I know it's difficult with COVID. There was restrictions here for the last year and a half. But if you can't bring someone, put them on speakerphone. Bring your phone with you, put them on speakerphone. It is always amazing to me how my wife would hear something completely different than what I heard. So I can tell you for sure, take someone with you, whether it's a friend, a relative, a spouse, a caregiver, anyone, just so that another set of eyes and ears is doing that. The other thing too is share every single symptom you have. Your healthcare team can't help you unless you tell them what's going on in your body. They don't know. So, I often joke and I say, if my left ear is twitching, I used to tell them that because maybe that was a sign of something else. So I always share every single symptom with them. Okay. So doctors want to be able to help you. They want to be able to treat you. But if you're holding something back, they won't know how to treat that thing. So when I had nausea after I got home, and they had stopped my nausea medication, unless I told them again and say, you know what, after I eat, I'm getting a little sick. Had I not told them that, they wouldn't have re-prescribed something new and different, which was wonderful. It just made me feel terrific. I was able to eat without any problems. So, okay. So next slide, Tracy. So as you move along, keep a list of questions. You're always thinking out there. And whether you're, and I want to call this old-fashioned and date myself, whether you're old-fashioned and keep a pen and paper is fine. Or for me, I use the notes section in my phone. And every time, I just saw my doctor last week, I put in the date and I put in the list of questions that I want to ask him. Why are my white counts so low? Or why are my red counts, high? Or why is my hemoglobin at this level? Whatever it is, I always put it in there so that way I can do it. If your doctor has or your medical center has a portal, I highly encourage you to use it. It's a little sometimes technologically challenging. It's okay, but I highly encourage you to use the portal. Set up your appointments, get your lab results. See everything out there that's available to you right away. It makes life so much easier. So the other thing too is if you're thinking about a transplant, have an evaluation. It's perfectly okay to ask your doctor to be evaluated for a transplant at a transplant center. Does that mean you're going for one right away? No, but at least you evaluate it and you know that option is out there. And the reason I want to say that is because, you go through and there's so many different therapies, and maybe the transplant is the right therapy for you, but you won't know that until you've actually been evaluated. So, all right, next slide, Tracy. We're going to rock and roll. And what else do we do? Well, you have lots and lots of questions. I had so many questions. I don't know who had more, my wife or myself. With so many questions. And, am I a candidate for a transplant? How long am I going to be in the hospital? When am I going to be able to return to work? And I'm able to have visitors. We had so many questions to go through. And hopefully I've been able to answer some of those for you. What side effects might you have? Well, I've listed several of them, and there's so many more. So there can be fatigue, there can be infection and bleeding. One of the things I forgot to mention, I did have 2 transfusions of blood while I was in the hospital. And that was to help stabilize my blood levels until your own stem cells can generate your own blood back. And that's a pretty common thing. And I also talked about you being neutropenic. And that's when you have absolutely zero rate of ability to fight off an infection. And it's funny. One of those things, every day I would order salt and pepper. Okay, every day I'd order salt and pepper to go along with my meal. If I was going to have an egg, I wanted salt and pepper on my egg, right? And every day the salt would come and the pepper wouldn't. And finally one day I asked somebody and I said, why don't you guys give pepper? And pepper's not purified. And I never knew that. Pepper is not purified. Salt is, pepper's not. So that's why I said they literally, when you're ordering food, they only give you everything that's cooked really, really well. So going back to your whatever effects you might have here, you could have nausea, you could have loss of appetite, you could have mouth sores. And luckily I did not have any mouth sores. I followed my healthcare team. They gave me this great mouthwash rinse that I used religiously every day. And I chewed a tremendous amount of ice chips and also frozen water ice. And that seemed to hold those back. All right, Tracy, slide 16, which is reasons to consider a transplant. Well, there's lots of them out there. And I think that the biggest one is there's no cure for myeloma yet. However, as I mentioned, all the clinical trials, all the evidence out there will support getting a transplant. And a transplant in the early process of treating your myeloma can give you some quality of life. And we'll talk about a little bit about how my quality of life since transplant has been in the next slide or two, but it's definitely out there. It may improve your duration of survival and remission. That's just one of the things. Higher doses of chemotherapy, and that's what they do. They literally give you a high dose of chemotherapy, is much more effective right before the transplant than smaller doses of chemotherapy. Again, it's all backed up by clinical trials, and we'll talk about what researches you can do to see them. Most people use their own cells. There is a 2 or 3% chance that you're going to have a donor cell, but again, as I mentioned earlier, it's an autologous stem cell transplant using your own cells, and that's really good. Most people have the potential to collect enough stem cells for 2 transplants, or sometimes 3 in just a couple days. So again, mine are frozen somewhere in Philadelphia, and hopefully I'll never have to use them again, but they're there if I need them. All right, so moving right along, and we're at my story since transplant. So I'll tell you a little bit about my story first, then we'll get to the pictures. So I went back to work on April 3rd. And as I mentioned, I was a department store manager managing, $30 million worth of retail inventory and 300 employees. Grueling job. And I had a great employer, and I loved that job. I worked all the way through the bone pain and through all the extra treatments and everything, all the way through until spring of 17, when one day the bone pain just became too much. As I mentioned earlier, I have lesions from my head all the way to my knees. Some of them relatively large ones. I have broken my neck. I have broken my ribs. I have broken both feet in just the past few years. I've had a tremendous amount of radiation on my shoulders and my elbows, my back. I forgot there was back surgery in there too somewhere. But again, none of it slows me down. I have to say that I am extremely thankful to be here today. I was on maintenance therapy for 5.5 years, all the way through until spring of 17. I took a chemo pill every single day. I took bisphosphonates. I did a bone treatment at first every 30 days, and then we moved it to every 90 days. And then I stopped all of that December of 19. Right before COVID hit, we stopped all bisphosphonates. I take a fair amount of supplements every day, and I have lots of different medicines that I take every day that are prescribed by my 3 different doctors, my cardiologist, my primary, and my oncologist. And I'm happy to take those. If it keeps me moving every day and I'm okay with that. And I run all of them by him. So whether it's one little thing or 2 little things, the 3 of them coordinate together so that I have a fairly good treatment plan. So I have, as I mentioned, I have two wonderful kids and a wonderful wife, and the transplant didn't actually stop me from doing anything other than those 3 months that I was recuperating at home. Myeloma is the only thing that stops me from doing things. Would I love to play some one-on-one basketball with my son? Yes. But do I hesitate to do it? Yes. Because in my case, if I fall down, I'll break a bone for sure. My bones are extremely weak. So I'm super cautious about doing anything that's going to cause me any kind of injury. Would I love to ride my bike again? Yes. But my wife says, oh no, because my luck, I'd fall down and probably break an elbow or a shoulder. So we don't do that. So what I did learn to do after I stopped working in 17 is I started to do a tremendous amount of volunteer work. So I work with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, among other organizations, and along with being a journey partner, to educate people about myeloma and stem cell transplant. And I try to give back as much as I can. So one of those things, and we'll talk about in the upper left corner there, that's Mary, my LLS buddy. And I won the Mission Award. In 2019, I ran for Leukemia and Lymphoma has this contest called Man of the Year. And I didn't win Man of the Year, but I did win the Mission Award because I was so passionate about spreading the word about the good works that they do and about myeloma education. And that was really cool. And the picture on the right, that's one of my good friends. His name's Tony. He's also a journey partner. And every year now, for the last 7 years, I've been blessed and invited to go to the TCT conferences, or what they call the Transplant and Cellular Therapy conferences. and act as a patient and talk with healthcare providers about myeloma and treatment and talk about our program. And I've met myeloma crowd there several times. And we happened to have last year's conference was in Orlando right before COVID hit. And we actually had like half a day of free time. And we actually took a backstage tour of Disney, which was pretty fabulous. So, even though, myeloma and the cancer closes a whole lot of doors, it opened a whole lot more doors. And I would never be able to meet great people. I would have never been able to go to a TCT conference and to do a backstage tour at Disney or other things like that. So I have to say I'm very, very blessed. I'm very, very thankful to be here today to talk about it. So it's been about I hit my 10-year diagnosis just a few weeks ago at the end of July. I'm looking forward to my 10-year anniversary of my 10th birthday coming up in December. And I keep on moving every day. I have to say that is the fatigue there? Yes, the fatigue's there every day. I try to walk every day. I try to exercise a little bit just to fight that off. So anyhow, as I like to wrap things up, I mentioned resources earlier, and they're going to come on your screen right now. BMT InfoNet out of Chicago, fabulous group of people, the Bone Marrow Foundation, and I'm just going to highlight some Myeloma Beacon, International Myeloma Foundation. They're all great resources. And I want to really go back to that Dr. Google thing. When you Google information about the prognosis of myeloma patients, some of what's out there is so old and so outdated. You really need to go to places like Myeloma Crowd and HealthTree and MMRF and get the most up-to-date information. So that way you're good. I thank you for your time this afternoon. I hope I've imparted some interesting knowledge to all of you. And I'm very, very gracious to be here today. Thank you. Question?
Wow, that was amazing. I loved that. I loved your candidness and your genuine approach to this. So thank you so much. First of all, I think we would all vote for you as Man of the Year. So next time you run, let us know and we can vote for you. There's several questions. Let me start by asking, were you originally an outpatient or were you intended to be inpatient all along? Oh, you're muted.
There we go. I was intended to be inpatient all along. My healthcare facility only does inpatient. That's why I mentioned some do outpatient, some have a combination. My facility uses only inpatient.
Okay, perfect. One of the questions that was asked was, what was the, let me see exactly how you phrased it. What was the rationale for using a PICC line versus a chest port for the fluid transfer? Did they give you this point?
Really good question. As I mentioned, I have a tremendous amount of lesions and I have really bad and brittle ribs. And they were afraid that they were going to break more ribs if they put a port line in. So that's why they did a PICC line. Yeah. So good question. No one's ever asked me that before. I like that.
Awesome. So Evelyn was wondering, how did you feel physically when receiving your stem cells? Like, what's that feeling like physically as you get that IV bag back?
Ooh, you're pretty much over the nausea at that point, because there isn't anything left in your system. I'll be really honest with you. I'm very frank. I literally, had nausea for a day and a half. So there's nothing left in your system. You're not eating anything and you're getting IV fluids. It's very anticlimactic. I have to say that because you're thinking it's this big, gigantic thing that's going to happen. And they literally hang an IV bag and it goes back into you. But it's nothing but joy. I can say it's nothing but joy. It's like, this is going to help me. This is going to help me see the light at the end of the tunnel. So yeah, I would characterize it in a three-letter word: joy.
Could you feel it like coming back in?
No, you can't. No, it's just like an IV. You don't feel it. There's nothing there. It always amazes me, and I ask my doctor all the time, like, how do they know where to go? And he says the body's a miraculous thing. They just know to go right back to your bone marrow, and they start their engraftment process. I'm truly amazed by that. But
yeah, I agree. I agree.
Some people do say, by the way, that it smells like creamed corn.
Mhm.
I did not detect any smell for mine. And talking with other patients, many of them have told me, oh yeah, it smelled like creamed corn, or it was smelled sweet, but mine, I didn't smell anything.
So let's talk about, you said they found the fungal pneumonia because you were spiking a fever every night.
Yes.
Let's jump back to that septic shock. Was there any warning signs, or was it just all of a sudden, bam, this is what's happening?
It literally, and I have, your memory over the years fades. I have to say that. I have vivid memories of the nurses crawling on my bed, trying to get IVs in me and doing things. I can distinctly remember that. I have to credit my wife 100%. She raised the red flag. She said, his temperature's rising a little bit. And I was just in a regular room and I was feeling okay. I have to say that I was feeling okay. I was chewing some hard candy and all of a sudden I said to her, he said, I'm getting really cold. And I started to get the shivers and the chills. And she went out and she got a nurse, and then one nurse got two nurses and three nurses and four nurses.
Mm-hmm.
Before you know it, there's all these people all over my bed trying to do me. And that's when they realized that wherever I was headed, they weren't able to treat me there. That's why they rushed me off to
Wow.
to intensive care. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, my temperature was spiking, 104, 105. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it literally happened in a matter of hours. I mean, literally hours. Yeah.
Wow. That brings me back after I gave birth. That's what happened to me as well. Luckily, I didn't have to go to the ICU, but I can see it too. The nurses crawling all over and trying to get that infection down. So yeah, it's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
People are singing your praises. Connie says, your presentation was fantastic. I had an auto SCT 7 months ago, and your insights are so helpful for folks considering or getting ready for a transplant. Thank you for sharing. And then Evelyn says, your presentation and guidedness has made me feel better about what seems so scary to me. I am now a little more brave about submitting to ASCT. Evelyn, we're happy for you, and also glad for your honesty as well. She also wanted to know, what kind of help did you need post-transplant? Your wife has been such a rock for you. What were her roles, and what were other people's roles in helping you recover?
Oh, good. Very, very good question. In the beginning, my wife took about a week off to be with me every day. And in the first few days, she would make me something to eat, and she would help me move around a little bit. And then the second week, she went back to work. And at that point, she had a very flexible job, so she was able to be home on occasion, back and forth. I had a visiting nurse come twice a week to help me with the IV antibiotic change and things like that. And she took blood samples and stuff like that, so I didn't have to leave my house. And as I mentioned, somewhere in the middle of everything, accepting help was very difficult for us. We were so used to doing everything ourselves. So having someone say, hey, I'll take your son to football practice, or our daughter to band practice, or whatever it was, or do you need groceries, or someone make a meal for us? We live in a beautiful area. I'm very blessed to have a great group of neighbors and friends, and they all pitched in and helped us. I have to say that. And whether that was either making a meal or going to the grocery, or somebody cut my grass for me, it was difficult to accept. We're very proud people, but you know what? In the end, it was well worth every second of saying, yes, it's okay to do that. Yes, please. Okay. Please do that. So that's it. So going back to the actual caregiver, so many times people say, well, I don't have anybody. But there's lots of resources out there to find someone. So if you're hesitant to do a transplant because you don't have a caregiver or a spouse, you can ask a friend, you can ask a relative, a cousin, or you can contact one of those organizations, and they can put you in contact with other people that might have resources to help you get you some help.
In addition to that transplant center too, when you're getting an evaluation, that's one of the questions that they ask, I believe, most of them at least, is, do you have that caregiver that can help you? And if not, they put you in touch with a social worker, some organization that is willing to help you. It's been interesting in the age of COVID. watching people learn how to get kind of outside help post stem cell transplant. More than ever, it's important to have your caregiver or neighborhood or somebody that you love and trust clean the entire house. We actually have a presentation on that we will share as part of the follow-up email that we share. But that's one thing that I wanted to add to your list, is one of the responsibilities or one of the things that you're not going to be able to do, something that needs to be helped by somebody else, is that cleaning of the household, making sure it's in pristine condition, again, so that you're not running that risk of infection. Rick says, approximately 100 days after my stem cell transplant, my doc told me the transplant failed due to an aggressive myeloma and that I should start chemotherapy again. How common are failures and what are typical reasons for failure? First of all, Rick, I'm so sorry. That's so frustrating, especially when you go through that rigorous, exhausting process to have undesirable results. While I can't personally tell you, I can look up for you how common are those failures, or maybe somebody in this audience is aware of that statistic. I do agree with your doctor. Typical reasons for failure is extreme aggressive myeloma. It depends on what kind of genetic risk you have. It depends on how you've responded to previous treatment. And unfortunately, it just depends on the person, because myeloma is so unique and it affects people in different ways, and treatment affects patients in different ways. So I wish there was an answer that I could tell you more clearly. Again, I can do a little bit more research on that question because it's a valid one, and we do plan to talk about that later on in the year as well, even though I can get you that information sooner.
If I can comment just real quick about that, you know, through all my meetings of different people through all these years, I've met several high risk folks and several whose transplants have failed. However, I also know many of them who are now 7 or 8 years after that their transplant failed, who are on a chemo regimen that's working for them, and they're having a fairly good quality of life. So even though your transplant may fail, there are still options out there. And then there's also the option of a second transplant. You know, that's also out there. Sometimes the second one sticks. I've heard that too through all my travels. Yeah,
awesome. Thank you, Michael. I completely agree. Cassie was wondering if you're able to share the specific maintenance therapy and doses you were on post stem cell transplant. Unfortunately, I believe you're not able to share that information.
Yeah, this is a non-branded program, and I'm not able to share. I can tell you that and you can guess, but I've taken I took a chemo pill every single day. Unlike some people that take it 3 weeks on and 1 week off, I took it every single day from July of 2011 all the way through until April of 2017. So.
But not branded. We're not branded. I love that. That's awesome.
Tracy, am I okay? I'm going to get yelled at now. Anyhow.
It's okay. It's okay. I shouldn't have asked the question. I just wanted to bring that up, that unfortunately there are some things that we can't talk about in these presentations.
Yeah.
Louise says, I think Audrey mentioned a session is planned for failed transplant. My failure was that M protein hardly budged, but she went on Revlimid maintenance and that lasted over 10 years and she only recently relapsed. So failure isn't necessarily true failure. And I would completely agree with that, Eloise. Thank you for sharing your story. It could be that even though, you know, your stem cell transplant could bring your myeloma down or make it vulnerable or more susceptible, and then that next treatment you go on is the one that really puts it dormant. So it's just, yeah, it's so unique and so personal, but thank you for sharing that with us, Rick, and we wish you the best of luck, and we can be in touch with you as well. So just letting you know. Sally or Glinda says, excellent presentation, thank you. However, other than the meth, how do you say that? Thanks. That high dose chemotherapy prior to treatment in SCT, in most cases, none of the treatments are chemo. It's a form of targeted therapy. Do you want to expand on that, Sally? What do you mean?
I'm just advocating that the word chemo is such a negative and frightening and scary term, and nothing that we take as myeloma patients is chemo, except right before, the stem cell transplant. Everything else is targeted therapy, which engages our own T cells in a lot of cases to kill the myeloma cells. And, there's gene therapy, there's targeted therapy, there's proteinase inhibitors, there's bispecific antibodies, but it's not chemo. So it's not killing any other cells in your body except the myeloma cells. Chemo kills all cells in your body. So I'm advocating to stop using the word chemo for myeloma therapy.
Well, thank you, Sally. It is true that myeloma is significantly different when it comes to treatments than other well-known cancers, specifically because it's unique. And also we have, I'll say, the privilege of having amazing multiple myeloma specialists across the world who are working extremely hard to accelerate myeloma research and get different targeted therapies, including immunotherapies, that are working extremely well with significantly less side effects than chemo. So thank you for bringing that up, Glenda. Sally Glenda. Her thing says Glenda, but her name is Sally, so that's why you guys are confused. That's what's going on there.
Yeah. Audrey, I know we're almost.
It depends if I'm logging on from work or from home.
Right. Gotcha. Go ahead, Michael.
I know we're almost out of time, but I did want to mention one thing. If there's folks out there in the audience that have more questions, I'm part of the Journey Partner program, and there are 10 of us in the country, and we now do some one-on-one coaching. So they can go to the Multiple Myeloma Journey Partner website and sign up for a one-on-one call. If somebody has some more questions, they can talk to me or any one of the other Journey partners more in depth if they so desire. So and again, it's non-branded though. We still can't mention any drug names, but we can talk more personal, if so to speak.
Wonderful, thank you. I will make sure to include that, as well as the different myeloma crowd resources that we have as well. I will make
myeloma coaching.
I will make sure to include that MMJP website. Michael's the third or fourth MMJP or multiple myeloma journey partner we've had, and I'm just so impressed by their organized presentations, their candidness, and their beautiful approach in sharing their stories. So thank you to Tracy and thank you to Michael for making, and everybody behind the scenes with the MMJP program for making this possible. We really appreciate you. We will finish up with just a couple of announcements, and then you are free to go. You're free to go whenever, actually, but you know what I mean. October 7th is going to be our next Stem Cell Transplant chapter event. We're going to have myeloma coach Louise Lavin come speak to us next month about how to protect our mental health after a stem cell transplant. Those 100 days of quarantine or isolation or restrictions can get really lonely, and the burden can become heavy not only on you, but upon your care partner and others who are helping as well. So Louise is going to share her advice with us and her helpful perspective about how we can be protecting our mental health even after this significant procedure. You may be interested in other upcoming myeloma community events that we have. Thursday, September 2nd at 7 p.m. Eastern that's today, is our MGUS and Smoldering chapter. We're going to be talking about the relationship between fitness and myeloma progression with Dr. Jens Hillingas. He is a multiple myeloma specialist in New York, and he's really interested in studying this relationship between fitness and precursor myeloma progression. So you're welcome to attend with us. That's going to be a 40-minute event tonight. The 7th at 1 p.m. Eastern is our financial coach chapter. Diana Valentine is going to be talking about good debt versus bad debt, and what does that mean for myeloma patients? Why is that important for us to know? Also that night at 7 p.m. will be, oh, that's not true. I needed to reread these slides before I put them out. Thursday, September 9th, so I'll make sure to edit that before these slides get sent out. Thursday, September 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern is our myeloma caregiver chapter. We're going to be discussing boundaries, learning how to make and keep them for everyone's benefit, and that's with licensed social worker Honora Miller. The 14th at 6:25 p.m. Pacific time, it says Central Time there. Wow, I do apologize, will be SoCal Myeloma Community Chapter. We're going to be talking with Dr. Fotis, who is a multiple myeloma specialist from UCSD, and he's going to be sharing with us a talk on genetics and why it's important for us to be aware of genetics and what we can do about it. The link to sign up for any of those events and even more events I have not mentioned today is found at the bottom of this slide and will be sent out to the follow-up email within 48 hours of the event's conclusion. Again, thank you to our sponsors, Bristol Myers Squibb, Takeda Oncology, Karyopharm Therapeutics, Adaptive Biotechnologies, Oncopeptides, Janssen Oncology, AbbVie, Sanofi, Amgen Oncology, and Genentech. And thank you for helping us build a strong myeloma crowd community. I appreciate you. And again, thank you, Michael and Tracy. And we hope that you have a great rest of your day. Take care. Thank you, guys.